All right, welcome back, everyone. This is Israelite in America, and today we're going to be looking at 3 ways that the U.S. government gave white people handouts. Yeah, handouts. Specifically, handouts that enabled the accruing of generational wealth that is still being enjoyed to this day, and that was just given, just granted. I want to be really clear on the offset and say this particular presentation is not going to be very in-depth. There's always, little intricacies and whatnot that can be found upon further digging, and but that's not the point that we're doing. That we're trying to achieve in this particular presentation. I'll provide you various sources, and you can go and do further research yourself. It's surprising to me. The reason I'm doing this video, it's rather surprising to me that a lot of people don't know, both old and young. A lot of just Americans walking around today don't realize just how much was given to white Americans. And even immigrants, white immigrants specifically, white immigrants. People just don't realize, they don't know just how much was given. And a lot of the arguments and narratives that are just so pervasive and full of vitriolic fervor these days. And again, it's largely on the right, largely conservatives, that you hear this pushback coming from when Israelites in America are like, hey, we need that there are injustices that have been done, things that have been laws and things that have been put on the books to keep us down, to keep us oppressed and repressed, and look, something needs to be done to address them. And we hear the response we hear from white America is, oh, I'm not giving you a handout. You don't deserve a handout. Pull yourself up by the bootstraps. My ancestors had to work for everything. We weren't given anything. I wasn't given anything. Yada, yada. That's the response you'll hear. And sometimes I'm aware that a lot of it comes from hatred and prejudice, racial prejudice. But there are some people that are just ignorant, that just don't know. And so I don't like to sweep everyone with a broad brush, and hopefully this presentation, brief as or not super in-depth as it will be, will help shed some light on some of this stuff. So anyway, I've been talking too much. Without further ado, if you appreciate content like this, then go ahead and drop a like, comment what your thoughts are, and subscribe. All right, let's get into this. First thing I want to talk about, or at least bring some light on, is the Naturalization Act of 1790. And real quick, I know some of you guys that will come across this video are going to know some of these things. I know some of you will know some or all of these things, but you'd be surprised how many people don't. Okay, so the Naturalization Act was passed by the first Congress of the United States, and they were, deciding who gets to be a citizen. Right? They come over to someone else's, they come over to a land inhabited already, and then they want to pass laws about who can and cannot be a citizen. You'd see the natives, they call them Indians. I'll use the name interchangeably in this presentation, Indians and natives, though I'm aware that natives is more correct. The natives of this country did not deal with stuff like this. They weren't, we decide who is on this land and who can come in based on criteria that we set. That's not the case. So the Naturalization Act of March 4th, the date right here, March 4th, 1790, basically defined who was allowed to be a citizen of the United States. Now, check some of the language here. I'll read the summary and then I'll read some of the bill itself. The first Congress, right, 1789 to 1791, that's the first Congress of the United States of America, established federal procedures and criteria for foreign-born individuals to become U.S. citizens. These criteria permitted free whites of good character with 2 years residence in the United States to become naturalized citizens. Congress also allowed citizens' children born outside the U.S. to be considered natural-born citizens over the following centuries. Congress readdressed the issue in a series of naturalization acts that sometimes excluded but increasingly included people of diverse races and origins. Oh, excuse me. This sometimes excluded, it was highly exclusive. And we'll get into that in just a second. Okay, so this 1790 act set the new nation's naturalization procedures. It limited access to U.S. citizenship to white immigrants, in effect to people from Western Europe, okay, who had resided in the U.S. at least 2 years and their children under 21 years of age. It also granted citizenship to children born abroad to U.S. citizens. Okay. Now let's read some of the actual language of the document here. Zoomed in a bit much. Hold on. Okay. And of course, it's the old language, older English. Be it enacted by the Senate and House of Representatives of the United States of America, in Congress assembled, that any alien other than an alien enemy, being a free white person, who shall have resided within the limits and under the jurisdiction of the United States for the term of 2 years, may be admitted to become a citizen thereof, and on application to any common law court of record in any one of the states wherein he shall have resided for the term of 1 year at least, and making proof to the satisfaction of such court that he is a person of good character, and taking the oath or affirmation prescribed by law to support the Constitution of the United States, which oath or affirmation such court shall administer, and the clerk of such court shall record such application and the proceedings thereon. Okay, so real quick, forgive the animation. Hey, we got to keep these things interesting. Real quick, I want you to notice some of the language, and this will be a reoccurring theme in this video. I will point to some of the language. Okay, when it says whites, right, free whites, first thing, free white person, and then of good character. What were these people thinking of that counted as good character? What counted as somebody of good character to these people? Because remember, they've already, so far in this bill, we see that this is a whites only bill. Okay, so it didn't include natives, and it certainly did not include blacks. Okay, who were chattel. So they clearly, for the thing I'm pointing to get at here is that their way of thinking was already far skewed as far as what constituted as somebody of good character. You know what I'm saying? Okay. Now let's continue here. Hold on. Where was I? Okay. And thereupon such person shall be considered as a citizen of the United States, and the children of such person dwelling within the United States, being under the age of 21 years at the time of such naturalization, shall also be considered as citizens of the United States, and the children of citizens of the United States that may be born beyond sea or out of the limits of the United States shall be considered as natural-born citizens, provided that the right of citizenship shall not descend to persons whose fathers have never been resident in the United States, provided also that no person heretofore prescribed by any state shall be admitted a citizen as aforesaid, except by an act of the legislature of the state in which such person was prescribed. So, if you were white and free, you were a citizen. It excludes everyone else. Very early on, it says, look at this language again, that any alien other than an alien enemy, right? Any alien, it says, anyone. Okay, except you, unless you try to, bomb us or something. Okay, any alien, being a free white person, right? So anybody, if you're white. Okay, so they come over, They take over land, and then they say, okay, you can't come in. You will not be counted as a citizen unless you are a free white person. And the reason well, anyway, we'll continue. Hold on. So there's a picture of a more, oh, pardon me. There's a picture of an old version of the bill. Okay. Now, I want to move on to, this is, and just so that you guys can know the site, this is visitthecapital.gov. So a government website that you're able to visit yourselves. All right. This is immigrationhistory.org. Immigrationhistory.org, this next website. And this is just giving us a little bit more of a summary. Okay, the Nationality Act of 1790, Congress first defined eligibility for citizenship by naturalization in this law and limited this important right to free white persons. In practice, only white male property owners, so in other words, in practice, how it was implemented, or how it was supposed to be implemented, what it was aimed at, only white male property owners could naturalize and acquire the status of citizens, whereas women, non-white persons, and indentured servants could not. Access to citizenship would become more expensive over time, expansive over time. In other words, things became a little more open. But you'd be surprised as to when. It says so right here. Although the racial restriction, notice this, although the racial restriction was not eliminated entirely until 1952. Many people are surprised to know that. 1952. This law produced the legal category of aliens ineligible for citizenship, which largely affected Asian immigrants and limited their rights as non-citizens to key realms of life in the United States, such as property ownership, representation in courts, public employment, and voting. Now, this, for some reason, is pointing out specifically Asians, which it did affect. I'm not saying it did not affect Asians. It affected whoever was not white. This affected, but Asians were not over here in mass at the time of this bill, and in the subsequent couple hundred years thereafter. They were coming over, but who was here? Why would they even need to put free white person in this Immigration Act? Okay, and I want to look at some of this. This is just a summary of what we already read, but yeah. So that's the first one. First thing so if you were free and you were white, then you could be considered a citizen of this quote unquote great country, this great nation. Right? They come over here. The settlers come over here. They afflict the native population already here, and then they turn around and are like, well, only free white persons should be able to be recognized as citizens in a country where other people are already. Okay, so that's one. All right, moving on. All right, so the next thing we want to address is the Removal Act of 1830. And this one is significant because it was done on a mass scale. Some of you will recognize this. Others may be surprised to learn at least some of the nitty-gritty about it. Okay? This is from a government website, history.state.gov. Okay, so it's not some random blog or something, because I know that some people will be, why are you just using some random website? Anyone could write a random website, when faced with history that they don't like. I know certain people like to do that. All right, so let's get into this here. It says the U.S. government used treaties as one means to displace natives from their tribal lands, a mechanism that was strengthened with the Removal Act of 1830. So real quick, they were doing things like this before, but the Removal Act is significant because of the scale with which it was enacted and enforced. Okay, but Europeans had been messing with the natives, and I'm using that word in lieu of other things. They've been messing with the natives for some time prior to this. Okay, in cases where this failed, and where treaties, the government sometimes violated both treaties and Supreme Court rulings to facilitate the spread of European Americans westward across the continent. So they're saying, hey, when treaties failed, when we were like, hey, well, let's make a deal, and the natives who had been there already were like, we don't want to make a deal, we kind of like it where we are, then, we would just run them out. Also, this European Americans thing, let's just say let's call a spade a spade. Okay, these were just Europeans that had come over to a different land, and maybe some other ones had been born by this time in this new land. But yeah, let's just say Europeans. Okay. As the 19th century began, land-hungry Americans poured into the backcountry of the coastal South and began moving toward and into what would later become the states of Alabama and Mississippi. Since Indian tribes living there appeared to be the main obstacle to westward expansion, white settlers petitioned the federal government to remove them. So what? White settlers petitioned the federal government to remove them. So are you telling me are you telling me, conservatives, that the forefathers here were like, hey, we want the people already here, natives are here, we want what they have. Government, do something. Give us this, government. We want a handout. Is that what we're reading here? So, certainly sounds like it. All right, white settlers petitioned the federal government to remove them. That's exactly what that is. Government, we want this. Do something. Although Presidents Thomas Jefferson and James Monroe argued that the Indian tribes in the Southeast should exchange their land for lands west of the Mississippi River, they did not take steps to make this happen. Indeed, the first major transfer of land occurred only as the result of war. In 1840, Major General Andrew Jackson led an expedition against the Creek Indians, climaxing in the Battle of Horseshoe Bend in present-day Alabama near the Georgia border, where Jackson's force soundly defeated the Creeks and destroyed their military power. He then forced upon the Indians a treaty whereby they surrendered to the United States over 20 million acres of their traditional land, about 1/2 of present-day Alabama and 1/5 of Georgia. Excuse me. Over the next decade, Jackson led the way in the Indian removal campaign, helping to negotiate 9 of the 11 major treaties to remove Indians. And let me just say right here, these were all quote-unquote Christian people. Okay? These are all Christian people going to church on Sunday, talking about praise Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ gave us freedom. We have freedom in Christ. The blood washes all sins, all men. He commands us to love one another as he loves the church. These are people who supposedly fled from religious persecution so that they could worship however they wanted. They fled that persecution to come over here and do this to other people. Sick stuff, man. And that's what makes it unique, you see. That's what you hear these people talking about, well, our Christian values is what made us unique, what made this country unique. It was no other nation had such principles like us. It was the problem with the Christian values that makes this stuff so heinous. You see, because in other nations, other places on earth, they might be at war or fighting with each other from time to time, the whoever it is, but only with these people, only with these Europeans, was it, Jesus loves everyone, he'll save everyone, everyone can be welcomed in. We want freedom. We want freedom of religion and freedom to worship and all this good stuff. And then turn around and they turn around and afflict and oppress people like this. That's why it was unique. It was too hypocritical. They're talking out both sides of their mouths here. Under this kind of pressure, Native American tribes, specifically the Creek, Cherokee, Chickasaw, and Choctaw, realized that they could not defeat the Americans in war. The appetite of the settlers for land would not abate because, they weren't content with just a little bit. They wanted more. They wanted empires for themselves. They wanted swaths of acreage. They didn't just want, 5 acres, piece. So, no, these people wanted, what would be the word? I can't think of the word. I'm going to just say plots, large sections of land. They didn't just want 10 acres. They wanted 150 acres, 200 acres, and more. So the Indians adopted a strategy of appeasement. They hoped that if they gave up a good deal of their land, they could keep at least some part of it. The Seminole tribe in Florida resisted in the Second Seminole War and the Third Seminole War. However, neither appeasement nor resistance worked. Fancy that. From a legal standpoint, the United States Constitution empowered Congress to, quote, regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the several states and with the Indian tribes. In early treaties negotiated between the federal government and the Indian tribes, the latter typically acknowledged themselves to be under the protection of the United States of America and of no other sovereign whatsoever. When Andrew Jackson became president, 1829 to 1837, he decided to build a systematic approach to Indian removal on the basis of these legal precedents. To achieve his purpose, Jackson encouraged Congress to adopt the Removal Act of 1830. The act established a process whereby the president could grant land west of the Mississippi River to Indian tribes that agreed to give up their homelands. As incentives, the law allowed the Indians financial and material assistance to travel to their new locations and start new lives, and guaranteed that the Indians would live on their new property under the protection of the United States forever. Now you tell me, did this happen or did this not happen? And we'll go over some more language in a minute. Did this last part happen? Or did it not happen? Oh, here's material assistance and money to start new lives and protection by the U.S. government forever. Was that the case? History will tell you. With the act in place, Jackson and his followers were free to persuade, bribe, and threaten tribes into signing removal treaties and leaving the Southeast. In general terms, Jackson's government succeeded. By the end of his presidency, he had signed into law almost 70 removal treaties, the result of which was to move nearly 50,000 Eastern Indians to Indian Territory, defined as the region belonging to the United States west of the Mississippi River, but excluding the states of Missouri and Iowa, as well as the territory of Arkansas, because they wanted those places. And there's reasons why they wanted those areas, which we won't get into right now, but because they wanted them. So, okay, go west of the Mississippi, but not here, and not here, and not here. As well as the territory of Arkansas, and opened millions of acres of rich land east of the Mississippi to white settlers. Despite the vastness of the Indian Territory, the government intended that the Indians' destination would be a more confined area, what later became eastern Oklahoma. So they kicked them out by force, put them somewhere, not where they wanted to go, but where the white settlers, where the Europeans wanted them to go. They couldn't even choose where they wanted to go. This was the Trail of Tears, in case that hasn't been made clear. This is where we get the Trail of Tears from. Okay? Forcible removal, and then they take their stuff. But hey, man, that welfare, those are handouts. How dare people be too poor to afford food in this horrible, horrible economy? I'm not paying for welfare. That's your problem. Lift yourself up by the bootstrap. I had to work for everything. I want to read some of this language here. This is from immigrationhistory.org. Okay, this is regarding the treaty. Well, that's not a treaty. It was the Removal Act. It's not a treaty. But I want to read some of this language here, and you tell me if this sounds like it happened or not. Okay, be it enacted by the Senate, House of and be it further. So this is again language. This is the actual language of the bill. And be it further enacted that in the making of any such exchange or exchanges, it shall and may be lawful for the President solemnly to assure the tribe or nation with which the exchange is made, that the United States will forever secure and guarantee to them and their heirs or successors the country so exchanged with them, and if they prefer it, that the United States will cause a patent or grant to be made and executed to them for the same. So basically, what this language is, as uncomfortable as it may be for us to hear in this present day and age, what this language is, hey, wherever we send you, that's yours. You can have it. That'll be yours. And you know what? The government will ratify and protect that. That'll be, that place will be yours. Be like a country within the country, or a nation within the country. Has that happened? Did that happen? And I know some people will say, oh, but all the benefits the natives get, and they do get certain benefits, but is it anything like this? Did these Europeans keep their word? Did these good Christian people keep their word? And be it further enacted, listen to this language, that upon the making of any such exchange as is contemplated by this act, it shall and may be lawful for the President to cause such aid and assistance to be furnished to the immigrants. Immigrants, you see that? Notice that. Immigrants. Who were the immigrants? Who were the immigrants? Who are the real immigrants? To be furnished to the immigrants as may be necessary and proper to enable them to remove to and settle in the country for which they have exchanged, and also to give them such aid and assistance as may be necessary for their support and subsistence for the first year after their removal. Okay, so now, for the first year is this language right here, but this language is different. This is in regards to them keeping, having their own territory and it being theirs. This is just specifically about certain physical assistance and aid for a year afterwards, right? Money and food and things like that. And as we all know from the Trail of Tears, I hope we all know about the Trail of Tears. I hope at least. The natives were not treated anywhere near properly. They were not treated anywhere near fairly or kindly. Nowhere near it. And then they still had struggles later on. Quite severe struggles. Nothing like the Israelite struggle in this country, but struggles nonetheless. And all of this done by good, quote-unquote, God-fearing Christian people. This is what people on the right will tell you. Okay? So I'm going to leave that part there as we move on to the next thing. The Indian Removal Act, 1830, right? So we're moving up. This stuff affects people to this day. These things affect families to this day. The Indians, the natives, are affected by this to this day, of course. They are affected negatively. The descendants of white Europeans are affected to this day, right? They marched them out of that land, and the government then gave their land to invading settlers. Well, of course, settlers is incorrect. Invading Europeans. And while we're on the subject of land, I mean, a lot of the thing has been on the subject of land pretty much, which, I mean, you guys know, you've got land, you have wealth. Land builds wealth. Land is wealth. Land builds and is generational wealth. This has always been the case. This always will be the case. Okay, more land is not being created. There's only so much land. Land has always been in a wealth generator, a wealth holder since forever. But speaking of land and handouts and just all the things that were given, the Homestead Act of 1862 is very interesting. I didn't know about the Homestead Act up until maybe the last year, maybe year and a half. I found out about the Homestead Act. It's very, very fascinating to me, especially with how the right, a lot of conservatives, characterize things today and talk about, again, lift yourself up by the bootstrap. My ancestors didn't get anything. You shouldn't have anything. I'm not doing these handouts. Yada yada yada. All this stuff. Check this out. Passed on. This is from archives.gov, another government website. Not some random blog. Even though, side note, I wouldn't have a problem using some quote-unquote random blog if it's historically accurate. But, some people like to see .gov behind things for some reason. So, passed on May 20th, 1862. And notice the dates, how we move up from the 1700s to the 1800s, now mid-ish, late-ish 1800s. The Homestead Act accelerated the settlement of the Western Territory by granting adult heads of families 160 acres of surveyed public land for a minimal filing fee and 5 years of continuous residence on that land. Now, listen, we got to get into not some necessarily fine print, but you got to read in between the lines. Here we go. The Homestead Act, enacted during the Civil War in 1862, provided that any adult citizen or intended citizen who had never borne arms against the U.S. government could claim 160 acres of surveyed government land. Claimants were required to live on and improve their plot by cultivating the land. The plot. See what I meant about large swaths of land? Their plot. They call it a plot, 160 acres. When we think of plot today, we think of like it's just a little plot of like what, a quarter acre, half acre in some suburb somewhere, and if that. Their plot by cultivating the land. After 5 years on the land, the original filer was entitled to the property, free and clear. Okay, you live on it for 5 years, and make quote unquote improvements on it, and we'll kind of get into what that is in a second. And you get that free and clear, get the land, 160 acres at least, except for a small registration fee, which was very small, like $1 something, or in some cases, or a few dollars in other cases, very small. Title could also be acquired after only a 6-month residency and trivial improvements. Okay, so you put a house on it, you put a shack on it, you cut down some trees on it. That was all legal, counted as in legal toward this improvement thing legally. Provided the claimant paid the government $1.25 per acre. Boy, I wish I could get acreage for $1.25 today. But then there'd be no more, because even, man. After the Civil War, Union soldiers could deduct the time they had served from the residency requirements. Although this act was included in the Republican Party platform of 1860, support for... Interesting. Who is the loudest voice talking about no anti-handouts and you shouldn't get any of this, and we don't do free stuff, and free stuff creates laziness, and all of these things? I'm just pointing out the hypocrisy. There's so much hypocrisy, man. And again, the left is no better. The liberals are no better. But to get into some of the meat of this stuff and to actually unpack it, you have to understand that the both of these parties, that the whole thing is a game. Let's just say that. The whole thing is a game. They're both playing a game. And that's the subject of another video for another time. Support for the idea began decades earlier. Even under the Articles of Confederation before 1787, the distribution of government lands generated much interest and discussion. And when it says government lands there, it literally just means land that was unoccupied within the United States territory. That's all that means. The act, however, now listen, because this is where, if any conservatives are watching, they'll be like, well, look at that. Look, see? So listen. The act, however, proved to be no panacea for poverty. Comparatively few laborers and farmers could afford to build a farm or acquire the necessary tools, seed, and livestock. In the end, most of those who purchased land under the act came from areas quite close to their new homesteads. Iowans moved to Nebraska, Minnesotans to South Dakota, and so on. Unfortunately, the act was framed so ambiguously that it seemed to invite fraud. It did. It invited fraud. That's of course it did. And early modifications, by Congress only compounded the problem. Most of the land went to speculators, cattle owners, miners, loggers, and railroads. Of some 500 million acres dispersed by the General Land Office between 1862 and 1904, only 80 million acres went to homesteaders. Indeed, small farmers acquired more land under the Homestead Act in the 20th century than in the 19th. Okay? Now, now you see conservatives, certain conservatives, not all conservatives, because I don't paint everyone with a broad brush, so not all conservatives, but certain who might be watching this video would say, well, look at that. See, it didn't eradicate poverty, and a bunch of people couldn't even get the land. Okay? Missing the not reading in between the lines, missing the point. First off, I never said, and no one has said, that, it just completely eradicated all poverty whatsoever among all whites, all across the board. No, it didn't, and you never will eradicate all poverty across all board ever. The point, however, is that this thing, the government, Republicans, this was a Republican on the Republican platform. was giving land, unoccupied land, to white settlers. White settlers, okay? Not only, well, I'll get to more of that in a second, but I don't want to get ahead of myself. I get excited. But so most of this land went to speculators, right? People buying land that were, oh, well, this land will go up later. So they go and bribe the people that are, trying to, what would be the word? The administrators, the officers, they go and bribe them and get land at great prices and just, and don't do anything to it. And then they hold on to it and then maybe sell it later on. Railroad companies buy it and expand, right? Cattle owners, people who had cattle. Okay, and you didn't necessarily need to be rich. Here's one thing that people don't understand. You didn't necessarily have to be rich to have cattle, for instance, in early America. You might work for someone who has cattle and acquired some cattle. You might have inherited some cattle. Okay, things like that. Miners, right? Miners were not rich people. Miners didn't have a lot of money. Okay, miners were not. Miners were quote unquote low class laborers, right? Loggers, again, kind of the same thing as miners, same concept. Not exactly the same thing, but it's not like loggers were rich people. Okay, and railroads. Now the railroads, that's where the money was at. Now I want to provide some more commentary here, but I wanted to read something else for you guys. Okay, this is from again archives.gov, government website, and this is addressing the Homesteading Act, and you can go and look all of these links up for yourself. Okay, it says any U.S. citizen or intended citizen who had never borne arms against the U.S. government could file an application and lay claim to 160 acres of surveyed government land. Pause. And remember, over here it says the Homestead Act provided any adult citizen or intended citizen who had never borne arms against the U.S. government. What did we just? What do we look at in the beginning of this video? The Naturalization Act. Who counted as a citizen? Because conservatives likely will tell you, some conservatives will say, well, blacks could do it too, and other peoples could do it too. Blacks were not citizens. Israelites were not citizens. So when it says any U.S. citizen or intended citizen, that did not apply to blacks. And yes, I am aware there was this. You always have the exception to every rule. I am well aware that there were scattered individuals. For instance, maybe some people that were fighting, some blacks, some Israelites that were fighting on the Union side during the Civil War. That maybe got certain promises or certain benefits, and even that was few and far between. That might have been able to take advantage of this to a degree. But again, how many blacks do you know that are out in the Midwest? How many? How many blacks are out in the Midwest right now that established or have land or sold land and moved? How many do you know? How many have you heard of? Okay, blacks were not citizens. This was not for them. This was again for whites and whites alone. For the next 5 years, the General Land Office looked for a good faith effort by homesteaders. This meant that the homestead was their primary residence and that they made improvements upon the land. Okay, we've already I read that. Okay, some land speculators took advantage of legislative loopholes. Others hired phony claimants or bought abandoned land. Okay, so again, you didn't have to. These whites didn't have to be rich. They just needed to have enough money to bribe someone or just exploit loopholes. I mean, just because some people didn't have bucket loads of money didn't mean they were stupid. The General Land Office was underfunded and unable to hire a sufficient number of investigators for its widely scattered local offices. As a result, overworked and underpaid investigators were often susceptible to bribery, this is going to be a problem in no matter what way you slice it. No matter what area you're in, people are always going to accept bribes. Physical conditions on the frontier presented even greater challenges. Wind, blizzards, and plagues of insects threatened crops. Open plains meant few trees for building, forcing many to build homes out of sod. Limited fuel and water supplies could turn simple cooking and heating chores into difficult trials. Once again, the Homestead Act did not just apply to areas where there were where it was only plains. Okay, that's so. While this is true to an extent, it is not the extent of everything. It's not the extent, because again, you gotta. I say this for the people that are gonna point and go, see, it wasn't just given. It was hard and this and this and that. Okay, the people that are gonna ignore the overarching point of this, to nitpick and point at things that are not of relevance or of significant consequence to the overall point. Ironically, even the smaller size of sections took its own toll. While 160 acres may have been sufficient for an eastern farmer, it was simply not enough to sustain agriculture on the dry plains, and scarce natural vegetation made raising livestock on the prairie difficult. Yes, of course, on prairies. Yes, they didn't all go and settle in prairies. As a result, in many areas, the original homesteader did not stay on the land long enough to fulfill the claim. If they were trying to go and build farms, they didn't all, as we just read, did not all go and try to build farms. Some just went and hopped on land, or some went and bought land for other purposes. Railroads had land. All of those things had trickle-down effect and affected families' generational wealth to this day. And of course, not for Israelites. We weren't citizens. Homesteaders who persevered were rewarded with opportunities as rapid changes in transportation eased some of the hardships. 6 months after the Homestead Act was passed, the Railroad Act was signed, and by May 1869, a transcontinental railroad stretched across the frontier. The new railroads provided relatively easy transportation for homesteaders, and new immigrants were lured westward by railroad companies eager to sell off excess land at inflated prices. The new rail lines provided ready access to manufactured goods, and catalog houses like Montgomery Ward offered farm tools, barbed wire, linens, weapons, and even houses delivered via the rails. Boom. So they were those who managed to stick it out 6 months, even if they didn't have much money, but they were able to stick it out. They were able to take advantage of this. Right, the rail lines bringing all this stuff, and then because then they were able to get loans and expand. Actually take hold of that coveted American dream. And I just want to say, you guys, that this did not just apply. Once again, because we've got to take everything in with all that we've learned. Okay, with the Nationality Act and taking all this in what's the word I'm looking for? In conglomerate, in confederate with one another. We have to take all of this together because, the Homestead Act did not just apply to white Americans, well, white Europeans living in America, but it also applied to white Europeans who were coming over to America. Oh my goodness, white Europeans that were coming over to America. And you will find that there were many European families of immigrants, as in later immigrants than the immigrants that were already in America at this point, that came and took advantage of this and got land and started farms and companies and invested in railroads and such. So we had people coming in, white people again, coming in from way out and benefiting. Our government was giving handouts to. Our U.S. government was giving handouts to immigrants. Yet another thing that Republicans complain about to this day right now. Oh, don't give those immigrants any benefits. Yada 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 yada. Just going over their heads. This stuff. These things on the books. Okay, these things that happened that have effects to this day. And the transfer and continuance of wealth and the restriction of wealth, because Israelites could not take part in this. We were fighting and dying in the Civil War and fighting for our lives in slavery and then segregation and such. But all that is another video. I'm not going to go over all of that right now. Anyway, I figure I'll wrap this up. That's three ways that the U.S. government gave handouts, because that is exactly what all this stuff was. Handouts to white people, because I was gonna say white Americans, but really it's just free white people in general, because this stuff applied to if you were coming over from Europe, you could take advantage of all this stuff so long as your skin was the right color. You could take advantage of all of this, and yet today, the Homestead Act, they gave them, let's just say minimum. Let's say all across the board, even though this wasn't true. Let's say all across the board, these people got 160 acres. Let's just say that. Then they got it and they were good. Couple years later, it was just 3 years or so after that, 3 or 4 years, came the 40 acres and a mule declaration that blacks were supposed to get. And they reneged on that. They couldn't give us our 40 acres and a mule. They couldn't do that. But they could provide 160 acres. I'm just going with the lowest figure there. 160 acres to white settlers who had not been enslaved, who were foreign in a lot of cases. But they couldn't do the 40 acres and a mule. And now these same people that have benefited and are benefiting from acts like the ones we just went through are spitting in the face and stepping on the toes and turning their backs on Israelites when we say, hey, something needs to be done. How come all of this has been done for you and for other peoples and so many others, but we can't get anything done for us? What is so terrible about us that you guys refuse to do anything to close the divide or to repair the harm that you caused to our people? Reparations. Why? What's the deal? Why are you so against rectifying evil? You guys know the answer. You guys that are in the know the answer. Anyway, this has been the American Israelite. Hope you guys enjoyed. If you enjoy this kind of content, please like, share, comment. Let me know your thoughts. What do you think? Did you guys know about any of this? Did you know about some of it? Did you gain any more insight now? Subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.